Hello and welcome to chocolate lovers of all flavors to today's edition of the Chocolate Life Live. And my special guest today is Carlos Eichenberger, the founder, chief chocolate maker, chief everything officer at Danta Chocolate in Guatemala City. And he's going to be joining us in just a second after we play the video. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. I'm joined by Carlos Eichenberger from Guatemala City. Carlos is the founder and chief everything officer. Is that a good way to describe your role at Danta Chocolate, Carlos?
I'd say that's pretty accurate.
Right. So if I can, I know that you have a main retail location in Guatemala City and that you had one other retail location. So how many people are involved in the operation there? How big a company are you employees wise?
It's a very, very small company. We now actually have 3 retail locations. I just opened one in July of 2021. I guess you could call that our flagship shop. It's a very, very beautiful location at a mall in Guatemala City. And so between production and retail, it's 12 of us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's a good sized operation for many specialty chocolate makers.
Yes, for sure. I mean, there's a lot that are, them and maybe 1 or 2 other people. That's the way I started. But as production grows and demand grows, we're definitely having to add a few more people every time, which is not easy. As you may imagine, finding qualified personnel is basically impossible here. So we have to do all the training ourselves.
Well, I mean, it is a good problem to have. I mean, managing growth is always a problem, but it's better than the alternative, which is, not growing and not being able to support the operation. But before we get into the details of all those things, I mentioned in the post on the Chocolate Life that you and I had been corresponding since 6 or 7 months after the Chocolate Life was founded back in 2008. But it wasn't until 6 or 7 years later that we met for the first time in person at Chocoa. You were there on a program for CBI, which is a Dutch NGO which fosters international business development. Is that a good way to talk about that?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. They're really helpful in training you to become either an exporter or a retailer. And so they have a lot of influence in getting you into good locations as far as shows and training and things like that goes. So they were instrumental in helping me out in the business development part.
Yeah. But unfortunately, you and I had never had a chance other than this one opportunity, I think, in Amsterdam to meet. And I've never been to Guatemala. I've been to El Salvador. I've been to Nicaragua. I've been to Belize. Been to the border of Guatemala down in Tabasco and Chiapas. Well, Tabasco's not on the border, but in Tapachula, which is right on the border. But I've never had the opportunity, or never made the opportunity to come and visit in Guatemala. But before we get there, Yeah, it's a beautiful country. I love the coffee. I love the rum. Everybody that I have ever met who is from Guatemala has been friendly and open and tell me great things about the country, right? As long as you don't stray into places you probably shouldn't stray into.
Exactly.
But I have a bucket list, and that bucket list has one item in it, which is to visit every country in the world where cocoa is grown. And so, Guatemala is one of the companies that's on that list. But what I want to do to sort of frame the conversation going forward for everyone is, do you have a background in pastry baking and confectionery that got into this? I mean, what did you go to school to study? What was it you're doing professionally before you got into chocolate? Did you have like that aha moment that says, yeah, chocolate is the thing that, I am destined to do? How did you start your chocolate life?
Well, I started late in life. I started in my 40s. And so I did have some culinary training, but not specifically in pastry or confectionery, just in general. And in the 1980s, I owned a catering business. And so that's basically my culinary part of the background. But as you may know, that's a very, very high burnout business. You can really, really just end up exhausted very quickly. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so I gave up food for a while. Not, consumption, but just, working in that business. I got into a completely different thing. I was a journalist for a while, and then I got into technology business, and I owned and still own, but it's not very active, a small company that did technology infrastructure for multi-dwelling units and businesses. Like networking, satellite communications, access control, just things that are completely unrelated to food. And also at the same time, with my dad, who had retired, we reopened our family photography studio. And so it was, completely out of the culinary realm. And then in 2008, which is just when you and I met virtually, I had some health issues that basically sidelined me for a few months. I had to have surgery and was just immobile for a while. And that's what got me started on reading up on chocolate. I had actually started doing that before when I discovered chocolate alchemy, which I think has been instrumental for a lot of people in getting into craft chocolate making, just because it's a
Right. I would say that probably the sort of, if there was an unsung hero, somebody whose contributions are not recognized enough in terms of
right.
founding and growing the specialty chocolate, which is the term I prefer.
Exactly. I think
It would be John and Nancy. I mean,
yes,
hands down.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
Right.
And so, yeah, I that's where I started, and I started, just as a curiosity thing, and just wanted to learn how to make chocolate.
Well, were you aware at that time that Guatemala was a cocoa producing country? Was there a history of chocolate consumption as a beverage, or as something other than
Yes,
Snickers, right? Candies
absolutely.
in the local bodega.
Absolutely. In Guatemala, for just about any event that's a christening, a first communion, a birthday party, anything, there will be hot chocolate served. And so that is definitely something that Guatemala has had for long before the Spanish conquest, because that's basically where drinking chocolate started, was here and in southern Mexico and all of Mesoamerica. So definitely the drinking chocolate has always been a part of social life here. And in the 1930s and 40s is when the consumption of more like confectionery type chocolate became popular here.
Well, I want to jump in there and ask a real world question. So when I think of the traditional Mexican drinking chocolate. What they're doing is they're using lavado, which is unfermented washed beans. And when I think
Right.
about cacao rojo in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Honduras, it's also unfermented washed. For the everyday drinking chocolate that people are doing consuming in Guatemala, is that the tradition there as well? It's a washed unfermented cocoa.
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
There's of course, there's always been a certain amount of cacao that's been fermented and used for drinking, but for the most part, it is lavado, mostly lavado.
Is that
And
what they call it in Guatemala? Do they call it lavado as
they
opposed to
call it
cacao
lavado.
rojo? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
no, they call it lavado. And so the people that make drinking chocolate roast it within an inch of its life. Usually after the roast, there will be some embers coming out of the roaster.
Ooh.
And then they use a lot, and I mean a lot of sugar.
Right. So, I mean, when I think about that kind of cocoa, what I'm thinking about is, they're emphasizing sort of a deep, rich, dark chocolate. Any other nuance, well, number one, it's not fermented in. And if it were fermented in, it's roasted out. Right. And
Exactly.
there's also a tradition, in addition to a lot of sugar. I mean, if I think about, a company like Mayordomo in Oaxaca in Mexico, you go in there and they will have, your recipe, this amount of cocoa, this amount of sugar. And then you can also throw in almonds and cinnamon and things like that. Is there that tradition in Guatemala as well?
There is mostly, I mean, if there will be any flavorings thrown in, it'll be cinnamon.
Okay.
So mostly it'll be a water-based drink with just cocoa and sugar, and there will be the other option mostly will be cinnamon. Some of the more traditional makers will have something with ground almonds, but that's very rare. It's mostly just plain and cinnamon.
Gotcha. Well, I want to take a quick break right now and just say to everybody who might be watching, if you are watching, whether it's on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you can go to the chat or comment section and make a comment and ask a question of Carlos while you're here. And so we have somebody who's checking in from West Africa, Samuel, who says hello. And just want to say that, I really love the fact that we have the global reach here. And also Juan Gonzalez, who's with the Mexican Arabica Bean Company, who will be a guest on a future Chocolate Life Live coming up, is saying that he's looking forward to coming to Guatemala and sourcing Guatemalan cocoa. So, what I would say is, Juan, is, connect with Carlos and he can hook you up. If nothing else, with some of the best confectionery that you're going to eat made in Guatemala while you're there.
I absolutely have the contacts with very good growers, so I think he could definitely benefit from getting in touch with me.
Right. So, absolutely. And this is one of the things that has always motivated me around creating the community which is associated with the Chocolate Life. I realized that together we all knew more than any one of us could know individually. And that by coming together and connecting and supporting each other, we could grow specialty chocolate in really, really interesting ways around the world. So I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you, Juan, when you do go and visit Carlos in Guatemala. And I want to make sure you bring me back stuff because, Carlos, I understand that, that even though, what you're doing is you enter international competitions, and we'll talk about that. I mean, in the lead up to, going live here this morning, you shared with me the fact that, Guatemala hasn't had a functional post office for the last 7 years. And I can imagine that, things like, Federal Express and UPS are just, getting anything, into and out of the country is a real struggle.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yes, that's correct. We haven't had a functional mail service for the last 7 years or maybe even longer. And just this year, it started working again. But even so, it is prohibitively expensive. I mean, the shipping rates are completely out of control, even through the mail service. And let's not mention the private couriers, like you said, UPS, FedEx, DHL. They're just, the prices are completely out of control. 10 times even what you would pay for shipping from the US to any place else. So that just precludes being able to ship anything in a manner that the shipping doesn't surpass the price of the product, which is pretty crazy. I had someone in Canada just recently wanting to purchase some product, and the shipping was 5 times the cost of the product. So, it just made it just impossible to ship.
All right. So what I'm going to say is, Juan, if you don't take an extra bag with you, buy an extra bag while you're there. Bring stuff back with you and share the wealth. I mean, you and I had an opportunity. So you were at Chocoa and you had a stand and you were sharing some of the products that you made, but that was back in 2014 or so, 2015.
Right.
It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
So I haven't, I have fond memories of what it was that I tasted then, but I've got to imagine that 7 years or so is going to result in, an increase in sophistication and understanding and awareness and just an overall improvement in terms of the quality of process and understanding. But before we get into the question about, who your mentors were other than John Nancy. So when you were looking at making chocolate, who did you look to for, the inspirations? But in your catering business, were you more involved in the kitchen or on the business management side of things? And I can imagine that if on the business management side of things, that have an understanding of running a food business, costing, labor, all these kinds of things are a real advantage for where you are now in your retail business.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I was actually involved in both parts, but more in the production side. I was a chef. I was a recipe creator, and so I had a business partner who took care of the administration part. But I definitely was involved in the costing and in a lot of the business aspect, but it wasn't my main concern. My main concern was the production side.
So what I want to think about is this. So when I think of Guatemalan cuisine, I don't know what that means. So I've been to Nicaragua and had a lot of, pechuga de pollo, right, in onion sauce, all right, which they call, I forget the name of it on the top of me, but it's not the name I would do it. And I've spent a lot of time in Mexico and I understand in great detail what Mexican cuisines looks like, both the Americanized version of it and, the really authentic stuff that you're going to get around the country. I have no idea what Guatemalan cuisine looks like. And, what are the flavors and other culinary traditions that might influence a chocolate maker and confectioner?
Well, yeah, Guatemalan cuisine is pretty different from Mexican cuisine, but it does have some more similarities with the rest of Central America. There's things like tamales, which are there's a version of it in just about every country, from Mexico all the way down to Panama. But then we have some other things that are clearly influenced by the indigenous aspect of the country. And these are dishes that are like stews and include things like roasted seeds and roasted and ground up seeds and roasted dried peppers and tomatoes. And there's different things that most definitely aren't the traditional Mexican thing. It's a lot less spicy than Mexican food for sure.
Right. But, when I think, for example, of ground up seeds, I'm thinking of a mole, which is like pipián, right? Which is very, very commonly found in parts of Mexico. But I think I'm getting from you that while some of the fundamental ingredients are going to be the same, right?
The end result is not.
The end result is
not. The thing, yes. For example, this dish that has the ground seeds that I was telling you about is called pipián. And so this has sesame seeds, and it has the roasted peppers, and it even has very, very darkly roasted tortillas in it, and ground up. So it really is very, very different from other things that I've tried in Mexico and the rest of Central America. There are things like that definitely are common to the area, like allspice and smoked chilies and things like that, which are definitely included in the local cuisine. And those are the things that I have incorporated into the chocolate.
Right. So for those of you who are watching live, I've shared the screen, and right now we're looking at the homepage of Danta Chocolate, and we're scrolling through the top through some of the products that are available. I'm going to scroll down a little bit just so we get some idea. You have some bombones rellenos, so filled bonbons.
Yes.
This is it looks like it might be a marshmallow paleta or something like that.
That's exactly correct. That's
right.
One in particular is vanilla marshmallow covered in dark chocolate.
Right. And then you have, you're making your own chocolate from cocoa beans. Is that correct?
Yes, we are. We're using exclusively right now Guatemalan cacao for it.
Gotcha. And it looks like, I don't have, so it looks like there is, I was looking at the decoration. It looks like, the decorations appear to be inspired by traditional themes, historical art themes in Guatemala.
Yes, it's Mesoamerican themes, not specifically Guatemala. We'd like to go to all over the region for our inspiration. And this, I have to thank Maricel Precia for it. Because she is the one that, she was one of my original mentors as well. And Maricel said, find what you identify with. And I did. I found the textiles and patterns of Mesoamerican art, and I ran with it. That's what I use for my art for my bars, and when I can, that's what I use for the decoration of the bonbons. But yes, it's definitely trying to incorporate the regional flavors and designs into the product.
So I'm looking here, and I would have to, say to people, mi español está mejorando. My Spanish is improving, mostly pronunciation, not necessarily vocabulary. But galletas would be crackers, fruits, cookies, mentas mint. Then you have things that are crunchy. So so these are primarily, you're using primarily ganaches, which are flavored.
We're doing ganaches, we're doing caramels, we're doing nut pastes. So we're trying to incorporate just about every aspect of chocolate culinary art into the bonbons and into the rest of the products.
So I would expect to find, I'm thinking, okay, I have seen a lot of work that incorporates maize, corn, in a variety of ways. And, I'm sort of interested in knowing if you've done that. I don't, this Madeira box, is that Madeira wood as opposed to Madeira wine? I'm thinking I'm in Guatemala. There's got to be rum in here somewhere.
Yes, these are the wooden boxes that we use for higher end gifts, if you will.
Gotcha. So so you're in Guatemala City. You have been able to participate in the International Chocolate Awards. You've won some awards. If we go to Instagram, for example, and we look at today's post, one of the things that I did is I published a second image. Whoops. This is not the one I want. Come on. There we go. Tell us about this. This is a world gold for best chocolate maker.
Yes. This was for one product in particular, but it won me the Chocolate Maker Award. And surprisingly, it's no dark bar. This is for white chocolate. And it's we do two different types of white chocolate. One is with blended cocoa butter origins, and then we do single origin cocoa butter white chocolate, and that's what this award was for. And so it garnered not just the chocolate maker, it did for the bar as well as the best white chocolate bar, and also for growing country, which was very, very cool.
So this is an otherwise unflavored bar with no inclusions, just plain white chocolate.
Plain white chocolate, yes. And it's a flavor bomb, because since we press our own butter, we're using exactly the same beans. We're not using inferior quality beans for pressing butter, and it's the same roast as we're using for the chocolate. It really does have a wonderful flavor and aroma.
So it
And
is what is we call a natural cocoa butter because it is
natural cocoa butter.
undeodorized. Is it
Definitely.
heavily filtered? So you get some of the color which is associated with the natural cocoa butter?
No, it's actually we're using unfiltered cocoa butter.
Okay.
We just let it settle
Mhm.
and don't use anything from the bottom of the pails that we store it in.
Gotcha.
And so it's a slightly yellowish for sure,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's still looks very nice as a
Mhm.
white chocolate.
Right. But important, fully aromatic, right?
Yes,
Because you
yes,
haven't taken
very much
anything from it.
so, very
Right.
much so. I
So
have a good friend that lives in Manchester, New Hampshire, and has a chocolate shop there, Dancing Lion Chocolate.
Richard Tango Lowy.
Richard, yes, Rich. And so with Rich, we've been friends for a long time. We went to chocolate school together at Valrhona. And so, this was in 2009, I think. So, yeah,
Okay.
quite a long time ago. And so Rich is a big fan of my white chocolate. And
Mhm.
he actually is one of the few people that flies down to Guatemala with empty suitcases. And he will leave Guatemala with 3 or 4 suitcases to their limit filled
Mhm.
with chocolate. And he uses it, throughout the year at his shop. And when he runs out, he'll fly back down again.
Right.
So
Talk about shipping costs.
yes, yes. Well,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
actually cheaper to do that than to ship it through any of the
Okay.
normal, especially if you're doing a couple of 100 pounds.
Mhm.
It's cheaper to fly it yourself than to
Yeah.
send it through any of the shipping services. So
Okay. So I want to say, Juan, if you are still watching, and if not, I will remind you, when you go to Guatemala, bring this back for me. I want to taste it. I am an equal opportunity chocolate lover. That's the way I describe myself. I am not going to judge in advance any chocolate, whether it's white, dark, or milk. I don't judge in advance. I'm going to wait until I put it in my mouth and give every chocolate an equal opportunity to either impress or disappoint, is the way to think about it. And I think that, white chocolate is seen by a lot of the community like the way white Zinfandel is seen among wine lovers. I mean, you can't really like chocolate if you like white chocolate. You
right,
can't.
yeah,
And for me, it's just, why would I cut myself off from this variety of human experience, and say that everything which fits this classification is unworthy of even discussion? And I think that, that says, oh, no, you're not really a chocolate fan, right? Because you have said
you
this
like white
entire class
chocolate.
of
Yeah.
work is no longer, is not interesting to me at all. Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah,
do you,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
It's always been, really, really, interesting to me about how people approach this. I mean, I think that my first epiphany when it came to white chocolate was a Venezuelan brand, El Rey,
El
Chocolates
Rey.
El Rey, and
Yes,
their El Icoa, and that
yes.
was the first time I'd ever had a white chocolate made from undeodorized cocoa butter. And I'm going, oh, this sort of changes my idea of things entirely.
Yes, I agree. And that, as a
So,
matter of fact, Icoa was my inspiration for my white chocolate. My formulation is very similar to theirs, and it was always the idea of making something as good as theirs, and I
mhm.
think I succeeded.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
definitely is a perception thing. And
mhm,
I believe that I've been able to change a lot of minds regarding white chocolate with, making white chocolate with undeodorized cocoa butter, because
mhm,
people always think that, I have a great anecdote from Emily Stone. I don't know if you remember
mhm.
her.
Well,
And
there are two
Emily,
Emily Stones,
yeah,
one of which
this is
is a
the
founder of
reviewer,
Uncommon, and then
not
there's gotcha.
she had a blog called Chocolate in Context many years ago.
Yep.
And
Mhm,
so Emily and I were together in Antigua, and she was going to taste some of my chocolate, and she asked me, "What do you want to try first?" And I said, "Try the white." And she's like, "Really?" And
mhm,
yeah, and her first comment was, "Most white chocolate tastes like soap," and I kind of
mhm,
agreed with that because it really, there's not much substance to it. And I said, "Just try this first."
mhm,
And so, she opened the bar. She loved the Maya design. Uh, broke off a piece, loved the snap, they put it in her mouth, and just her eyes got big as saucers, and all that came out of her mouth is, "Oh, yum!"
Right.
And that was the perfect reaction that I was expecting from somebody, and from then on, I knew that I had a good thing in my hands.
And what I would say, as somebody who's been professionally rating and reviewing chocolates for more than 20 years now, very early on, one of the things that I was seeking, sort of like an adrenaline junkie, what you want is that, oh my God experience. When you put something in
Yes.
your mouth, you just go, your eyes go and like, oh my God, what am I tasting? Unfortunately, with so much experience, it gets harder and harder to find that moment. But in that, because they're so much rarer, they are that much more special these days. So I do have a bunch more questions from you. We don't have any questions from the audience right now, but I want to say hello to Richard, who has been watching from Ghana, and also from John Masalonia Garcia, who is connecting from Mayak Chocolate in Honduras, who says saludos. So you talked something about changing minds about white chocolate. So, Danta Chocolate is one of the few chocolate makers from the bean, small chocolate makers from the bean, working in Guatemala. I don't know how many other of these small chocolate makers, like maybe there are less than 10 of them, fewer than 10 of them. I don't know how many of them are just making chocolate, or how many of them have also done, more traditional European style bonbons. But how do you think the work you're doing is actually changing the minds of Guatemalans, right? And I suppose how much of your business, probably not much recently, is associated with the tourist trade, right? And why they come to you as opposed to someone else.
Right. Well, yeah, for Guatemalans, for sure, it has been an uphill battle, principally because they perceived locally made products as inferior. That has always been a perception here, that anything that's been imported is better. And so one of the two balance points between price and quality, people don't understand why my product is more expensive than something that's imported, because it is. You can get Belgian chocolates here for less than what you pay for mine, but they're made in a huge factory by machines. And my product is all made, in a very, very small facility by human hands and nothing else. And so that was one of our uphill battles. But once people tried the product, that was their epiphany, let's say, when they said, "Well, yes, this is as good as or better than anything that's made in Europe or anywhere else."
So can I ask a question? So when we think of international brands, right, that sort of fit the market profile where you are, we might say Godiva, we might say Leonidas, we might say Lindt, right? So when people are people comparing what it is that you make with, these upscale imported brands, or are they thinking more like, Milky Way bar, Snickers and things like that?
No, there's a pretty good awareness of brands like that. They sell Côte d'Or, for example, here, and other relatively upscale brands. So yes, they will compare it, but of course, there's people who will think of a mass-produced thing like Hershey's or something like that. But for the most part, people are aware of the higher end brands, and so they will understand that they are comparing these products to mine. But there isn't a real point of comparison, because there wasn't anything like my business here, at least in the city, before I started. There's been a few more recent upstarts, but there haven't, before I started, there really wasn't anything similar. There were no decorated bonbons. There were no extensive confections made from locally made chocolate. Everything was imported. There's one chocolate shop that precedes me, which is, they have pretty nice product, but they've always used Belgian chocolate for it. Even though they claim to be a Guatemalan business, they're still using Belgian chocolate. So, it's. I think that it was myself here in the city and Fernando Arias of Fernando's Cafe in Antigua, here in Guatemala, that got started with making the chocolate ourselves and making products from it and selling them retail. Before that, it just wasn't a thing.
So before I jump into the next question that I have around this is, I want to remind people we're watching the Chocolate Life Live. And my guest today is Carlos Eichenberger of Danta Chocolate down in Guatemala. If you're watching live, you have the opportunity to enter a comment. If you're dialing in from some remote country or watching from some remote country, let us know. And if you have a question for Carlos about anything that he's mentioned, or a response to something he said that you want clarification for, just go into the chat, whether in Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, and let us know, and we'll get the question up on screen and asked and answered. And with that, so Carlos, in looking at the range of flavors and the range of products that you produce, would you say that Guatemalans are more appreciative of flavor profiles that come out of the local cuisine, or they look to, for example, I don't know, if there is, in Brazil and Argentina, we have the alfajor, which is a cookie with caramel between it. And I don't know if there's an equivalent kind of thing in Guatemala, but are they looking for, flavors that I would think of as more European, or at least non-Guatemalan, or are they attracted to the flavors that remind them of the flavors they would get, for example, in their grandma's kitchen?
I think that there's a mix, a pretty good mix of tastes that people have. They probably don't come in expecting to find, typically Guatemalan flavors incorporated into the products, but they're pleasantly surprised when they do. Let's say passion fruit, let's say allspice, let's say smoked chilies, coffee, rum, and things like that. They will be happy to see it. A lot of people are more attracted to the European things like, pralines and pistachio and almonds and hazelnuts and things like that. But in the end, when you buy a box of bonbons from us, I think that it'll be a mix of both of them, because people will definitely be attracted to the local aspect and think it's a very cool thing. But they will also like the European or Western inspired flavors as well. And I think that we've achieved a pretty good mix of that by doing that.
So are there indigenous, so you mentioned pistachios, you mentioned almonds, you mentioned hazelnuts. I didn't hear Brazil nuts in there, but is there an indigenous nut industry? So something that I know that you're probably growing sesame ajonjolí in Guatemala, I would imagine.
There's a pretty good sesame business, and they're growing a lot of macadamia nuts here, which are not native, but they're very, very high quality.
Macadamia nuts, for those people, most people think they're from Hawaii. They actually originate in Australia, just in the little bit of history for people.
And the macadamias here are super, super high quality. So I've been using a lot of them lately. I don't use Brazil nuts because they spoil very easily. The oil in Brazil nuts is just super, super delicate, and it will go rancid in a heartbeat. So we don't really want to risk that, having some rancid nuts going into a product, and that would just destroy our reputation.
Absolutely.
So,
if I can, I want to jump in here because there's a really interesting point that occurred to me about the macadamia nut. And I was wondering, For example, in Nicaragua, you have coffee at the higher elevations and cocoa below it. But when most people are aware of Guatemalan coffee, if they know about Guatemalan cocoa, they may only know of origins which they might associate with uncommon. So lechua, right?
Yes.
And asochavite.
Right. Those are all, everything from uncommon is from the northern part of the country, which is not actually a traditional cacao growing region. And so this was introduced pretty recently in the last 20 years, let's say, while the more traditional regions for growing cacao in Guatemala is the Pacific coast. And so, yes, like you say, there will be coffee because in the Pacific coast, there's a line of mountains that comes down and that the coast comes down from. And so on those mountains, you will find the coffee at the higher elevations. And then, you have to remember that cocoa production here is very small still. In the 1930s and 40s, there were 30,000 tons a year being grown here.
And now respectable amount for the times.
Yes, and now it's 2,000. So it's a big decrease. There's a lot of competition for land in that particular altitude region, and so cocoa is a pretty labor and money-intensive crop, and so people shy away from it unless they really want to get into it. So yes, for sure, that is what would happen.
So macadamia is grown in another part of the country at different elevations and is not competing with land for coffee and cocoa?
No, it isn't. And also it can be used as shade for cocoa and coffee. And so it can also be integrated into the plantations in an agroforestry system, which is pretty cool. I've seen a couple of farms here in Guatemala that are using that system. And it's very interesting because they have varying heights of trees being used as shade for the cocoa, and then other trees being used as shade for coffee. And so there's macadamia, there's a mangosteen, there's rambutan. So there's different fruits that are being grown, citrus as well, with the cocoa. And so it makes for a very, very nice and sustainable system. And on top of that, they have precious woods.
Right. So you're going teak and mahogany is very, very tall woods, and it does provide some shades, but you can say, oh, I'm going to get a harvest in here in 10 years, and I'm going to get a harvest here in 20 years. And so, that's my retirement in some respects, that I'm looking at right now.
So you will see beautiful, beautiful, huge trees that are still growing, and that in 20 years will be harvested. And like you said, it will be the farmer's retirement for sure.
Yeah. No, I think one tree might represent their entire retirement.
Yes.
And we think about using trees for shade, but I think that one of the more interesting things, and I think that maybe something that you're hinting at, is that you can also use them. Number one is windbreaks, right? If you're in an area, so you can use them to some extent to. You want to control humidity. You don't want to be too humid or too dry underneath the trees. Too humid, and you will get
root rot.
All sorts of fungal diseases turn out to be a problem. If it's too dry, then you need to irrigate perhaps. But you can use the trees planted to form windbreaks, very, very common. I've seen eucalyptus used in Peru, for example, and I don't think of eucalyptus as something I would find in Peru, but I was surprised to see it there up near the Ecuador border in the Chulucanas area in Piura. But also, you can use the planting of trees in order to be able to support what are called biodiversity corridors. What you want is the free movement of animals and birds and insects from one part of the country to another country. And by integrating diverse forest species as ways to divide the farm up, right, for want of a better term. You can also do that. When people are thinking about planting cocoa, as you say, it's a resource intensive, it's a money intensive project. Are those kinds of issues near the forefront of Guatemalans' minds when they think about these things?
The ones that are interested in growing cocoa, for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
But
Well, and then you also have, new coffee plantations.
yes.
You also have new macadamia plantations. So,
Well, there's also enormous competition for the land here from crops that we don't really like African palm.
yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why it's very important for these agroforestry systems to work and to be financially viable. So these farmers can actually not just survive but thrive.
Mhm.
And because definitely there has to be a certain amount of financial stability or power for the potential farmer to be able to get into growing cocoa, for sure. It's a as discussed earlier, it's a much more financially intensive crop than, let's say coffee or corn or rice or beans. And so there will always be very few people that are really 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 interested in doing it, and that will take that huge commitment to get into growing cocoa. I've met people that have failed, and they have gotten into a huge financial hole because of it, and it's because they at maybe one or two of the necessary steps weren't exactly right, and it just killed their operation. I have some good friends that got into it in the wrong part of the country. And you mentioned it a couple of moments ago, that needed irrigation. And they
Mhm.
actually needed irrigation. And they had so many expenses moving that water to their trees that it killed their operation. It just completely unbalanced it, and so they had to stop. They lost thousands of trees, and they lost everything. Not They didn't lose everything financially, but the operation was completely lost. So it really does take a very special kind of dedication to start up with growing cacao here.
So let's turn that around if we can, because I think it's an interesting question. So at the moment, there's about 2,000 metric tons total production, or is that 2,000 metric tons exported?
No, 2,000 metric tons total production.
So you're a net importing country, and you're probably
Definitely.
bringing stuff in across the border from Mexico
Oh
and
no, 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 no,
no?
no. If there's cacao coming in from other countries, it's going to be from Nicaragua, it's going to
Mhm.
be from Ecuador, and it's going to be from Africa.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it'll
So
be in the form of liquor. It won't be in the form of cacao beans. It'll be 95% liquor already processed, and that's what the confectionery business will use instead of the local cacao. Add to that, which
mhm,
is something we haven't discussed at all, is pricing.
mhm.
Cacao here is very expensive. It's $200 for a 100-pound sack, so it's $2 a pound. Compared that with
Is that
Ecuador,
so? That's the farm gate price.
that's a farm gate price. Yeah,
So just to put that for people who may not be used to pounds,
yeah,
right? So we're looking at roughly 450 a kilo farm gate price.
something like that. Yes.
Gotcha.
So
Which
it's
is
very expensive,
well above the market price, which is usually a
way
delivered
above.
price. So it's
Yes,
like
yes,
two times delivered price or something like that right now.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
at the farm
for
gate.
as an example, in Ecuador, the last time I was there, it was $95 for the same amount.
Yeah.
So it's more than twice. So
Mm,
start with that, and then there's the availability of African processed liquor already
mm,
for much less than that.
mhm,
So people will definitely choose to bring that in, and then they'll bring a lot of Ecuadorian cacao as well,
mhm.
usually CCN 51, which has already been processed into liquor, and
Right.
it's perfectly fine for confectionery style work.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with it. It tastes like chocolate and it works just fine. It's just not a not a base material for fine
Right.
chocolate. But no, there's a market for everything.
So I think the point that I wanted to get at, Carlos, and thinking about the price, and I was going there next. So
Okay,
thanks for anticipating that for me.
okay.
is there's a lot of heat and light, but not a whole lot of resolution, in particularly in the cocoa belt of West Africa, around this notion of living income. So at $4.50 US a kilo at the farm gate, is that adequate for the average farmer to be able to not just survive but thrive? And I'm going to assume that, like many places of the world, cocoa represents only a portion of their income stream, that they're doing other foods and they're doing other things to supplement whatever it is they're getting from cocoa.
For the most part, yes. In here, since it is a higher price that they're getting for it, but the thing is, it's so much less, so much less quantity of cacao itself.
Mm-hmm.
So at least the larger producers that I know are doing quite well, and they're already either exporting most of their production or selling it locally. Either way, but they're selling it for what they want. So it's a pretty good position to be in. Mm-hmm. Where, as opposed to, where the price is dictated by the buyer. Here, for the most part, the seller is dictating the price. And so they will definitely be able to progress and make the living conditions of the farm owners and workers better as time goes along.
I want to put a pin in that, if I can. I'm not going to put a pin on it. I'm going to talk to you right now. So when you say large producers, we think when many of us think about cocoa production, we're thinking about smallholder farmers. So larger producers, you're talking about estate holders and hired labor organizations, as opposed to a smallholder farmer working their own plot of land that has some trees on it.
Right. Yeah. These are multiple hectares of land, either in the tens or hundreds of hectares. As opposed to, a normal smallholder will have maybe 1 or 2 hectares of cacao planted. And that's where, cooperatives like Uncommon, the ones that work with Uncommon come into play, because they collectivize their cacao system, and they are able to improve, so the smallholder will process their cacao at the cooperative's facilities, and then it'll be all gathered together and sold to exporters like Uncommon. And the larger producers will have all of this in-house. They will have their processing facility, they will have their packing facility, and so everything will be done by them. Whereas, in the smallholder system, they will mostly work through cooperatives.
Well, I think that if I can, I mean, I'm somewhat of a unionist when it comes to collectivizing farm labor in cocoa. I mean, the individual smallholder farmer doesn't have a whole lot of leverage, and may or may not have the luck, right, weather, and a bunch of other things to be able to take a relatively small amount of cocoa, right, over the course of the entire harvest and be able to do the post-harvest processing consistently. Right? So they're accepting all that risk is theirs, right? But if you can get a number of smallholder farmers together to say, oh, together we can produce a container's worth of cocoa, for example, at least 20 metric tons dry. And what we can do is we can centralize fermentation, especially because it's a critical step in creating specialty cocoa, which demands a higher price for what's going on. So do we find that kind of, collectivization is sort of culturally within, because I know that there are some cultures where the notion of joining a cooperative is a much more difficult thing historically, culturally, than it is in others. Is this something, the idea of, banding together, something which comes naturally to Guatemalans?
I think it's pretty widely accepted. It came to other agricultural products before it came to cocoa. So there's been collectivization of things like, coffee for starters, bananas, cardamom, a lot of different crops have been, a lot of vegetable growers are collectivized.
Mhm.
And so, especially the ones that export. And so definitely it's been pretty widely accepted and taken up here. And there's not a lot of resistance to it because they do see the advantages that it entails.
Mhm.
So fortunately, that's been not been an obstacle at all here, and people seem to accept it pretty readily when
Mhm.
they're offered to be brought into a system like this.
Gotcha. So we're coming into the last stretch here. It's 55 minutes in, and
Wow,
the time has seemed to pass
just
effortlessly.
flew, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it always helps to have wonderful guests, and who have a lot of things to say. And
Get me talking
Carlos.
about chocolate, and it'll be way more than an hour. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely true. What I want to do is I want to briefly mention a couple other things before I give you, closing arguments, as it were, Carlos.
sure.
Number one is that if you go to thechocolatelife.com right now, this is the homepage. It's live. So you can see the stories that are there right now. If you click into the story about today's post, what you'll do is you'll see um, my write-up. There are images that I've taken from the Danta Chocolate website. There's also one or two that Carlos shared with me that are not on the website, I think. There is a link to the homepage, and then you'll also get a chance to look through at I'm looking over there, and my keyboard is over here, and so it's taken me. Oh, come on, Safari. Let me see if this one will do it. Can't find the server. That's weird.
That's very strange.
Um, Here we are. In any event, I don't understand what's going on there. And I don't want to interrupt my VPN and do this. I'm sorry, everyone. This is one of the great things about doing things live.
Oh, Clay, I think you're gone. I think it's your internet that died.
I'm back.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. This is what happens when you do things live. It appears that what happened is that my VPN hiccuped, and I lost my connection for a few seconds. In any event, here's the Chocolate Life Live, yes, homepage. And you can go through to the post on Danta Chocolate. You can see their work. You can see a bunch of the awards that they've won for their work. So that's there. You may or may not have noticed that on the top of the page, I'm the technical editor at International Confectionery Magazine. I wrote an article recently about how, in the United States, we think of a candy bar one way and a chocolate bar another way. And then someone who might be coming from another country might use chocolate bar or candy bar in a very different way. And so I went and I talked to colleagues of mine in South Africa and Morocco and people who'd been in South Korea and the UK and said, when you think of chocolate bar, what does it mean? It was a very interesting article to research and write. And I'm really happy. And you can go there, and the entire article is not online, but you can sign up and get a free subscription if you're interested in that. Also, I maintain a calendar on the Chocolate Life for all of the live streams. So here is today's live stream. And then we have an archive of all of the past live streams. So you can go there. If you don't want to go there, what you can do is you can click on the YouTube playlist and go there, and you can see that we're actually live. And if I wanted to go watch live, I could actually see this. You know what? I'm not sharing my screen, am I?
No, you're not.
Okay, well, that was a waste of time. Anyway, right, I got flustered by the fact that I dropped my connection. Anyway, the Chocolate Life Live, right? The page about Carlos is about this live stream, an article for International Confectionery Magazine, the YouTube playlist. Okay, very, very short catch up on there, and also on Instagram. If you're not already a member of the Chocolate Life, there's a button called join. And if you join the Chocolate Life, you can show your support as a free member or as a paid member. I understand that resources are challenging at this time, and I appreciate all of the support that you do give me. And being a free member is a great way to start showing that support, and I appreciate it. So Carlos, we got a minute or two left. What's the future of Danta Chocolate? What does the future hold?
Boy, good question. Well, definitely a little bit more retail expansion. Our goal is by 2025 to have at least 6 retail locations. And then I probably will retire by the time I'm 65. That's my goal, at least. And I have a niece that has expressed interest in being my successor. So hopefully that's what's going to happen, and we'll keep the family business going and make it into an international enterprise, which is what I'd like to see in the second generation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make a little pause, and you asked me about my influences, and I actually forgot to mention the Chocolate Life. It really was a very good influence to be able to join a community like that. And remember, this was at the very start of the craft chocolate movement.
Yeah, this was November of 2008 when you joined.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And so it was great to be able to go to a resource like this and look for and share information, because it was very, very scarce at the time. There's a lot more information available now, but at the time it was very, very, very seldom to come across a good collected source of information. So for sure, the Chocolate Life was one of my good starting influences. So thank you for that.
Oh, listen, it's my pleasure. I mean, I am where I am because I stood on the shoulders of the people who came before me, and realized that as much as I might want to know everything, I can't know everything, and that by giving information to people, they were much more likely to share information with me. And that's something that I learned very early on in my career as a writer, that I found that if I was always calling people up and the information flow was only from them to me, eventually they would just get tired and wouldn't pick up my phone calls. So I made a point of making sure that, every time they got a phone call from me, that, I said, I tried to prepare some nugget of information that they might not know, or some view or perspective they might not have thought of or been aware of. And so when they saw, this was before caller ID even, when they pick up the phone, they know that they would be rewarded for picking up the phone. And I do want to put, a little bit of history on it. So in 2008, there were really only 3 online communities off of Facebook, right? And one of them would have been the Chocolate Life. The other one was going to be Chocolate Alchemy, right? And the third one would have been 70%.com. 70%. So that's Martin Christie before he expanded into his what it is that they're doing right now. And I think it was really, really important at the time. And maybe Carlos, you can echo the sentiment. So for me, what was really important is that Chocolate Alchemy had its niche and what it was trying to do, and 70% had its niche in what it was trying to do, and there was virtually no overlap between those 2 communities.
None whatsoever. One was like a review site, and the other one was how to make it, but there was nothing in between. Right. Absolutely right.
But that's where I positioned the Chocolate Life.
Yes.
Right. I saw we could talk about rating and reviewing. We could talk about gustatory stuff. We could talk about that. And we could also talk about making things as well. But my business was not in selling equipment, and my business was in selling beans. And so I could adopt a sort of a different perspective than what Chocolate Alchemy was doing. But I think it was really important, in those years that there existed this trio of communities, each one of which was looking at a very different part of the industry. And thank you for recognizing the contribution that I've been able to make. It's been great for me because it is, 80% of what it is that I've learned in this business has been from interactions with members of the Chocolate Life. Yeah, and we've got Chef Jeffrey Gardner, who's with Marsata Chocolate in the Los Angeles area, who's been a longtime follower, a longtime contributor, has been, has been a participant in many of these live streams. Says yes, he remembers all the sites well, all different in their own way, as he put it together. But absolutely, thank you very much.
Yes.
And with that, we've run a few minutes past time. I want to be mindful of everybody's schedules today. It's a Friday. We're going to get people out the door. It's you're 2 hours earlier, so you're in Guatemala, so you've got to be itching and getting ready to get to the workshop and to get to the store.
I
So
do. I got lots of chocolate to make.
You got lots of chocolate. Well, yeah, as I say, there are worse problems to have.
Mother's Day is coming, and it's one of those peak times, and so
absolutely
we need to get ready for it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what I really want to do with the last few moments that we have is to be able to remind people about some upcoming stuff on the calendar. So this coming Tuesday, my guest will be Mickey Mastrati. And Mickey is the documentary filmmaker who is responsible for The Dark Side of Chocolate. And he just released last month at the Copenhagen Documentary Film Festival a follow-up film, which is called The Chocolate War. And so Mickey is going to be my guest. I'm really, really excited to have him be my guest next Tuesday. And then next Friday, we're going to be joined by the executive director of something called the AVPA, the Agence Valorisation de Produits Agriculture, the Agency for the Valorization of Agricultural Products. They've just created a new awards program for chocolate which is produced at origin. And so a week from today, we're going to be talking with one of the organizers of that festival about what makes it unique, what makes it different, why we should care, what you need to know about entering the festival if you want to enter it. But what's really, really cool is that the only people who can enter the festival, irrespective of the size of the company, are companies that are producing chocolate in producing countries from beans that are grown at origin. And so I think it represents and Carlos, maybe it's something you'll want to look into.
I was contacted by them. Yes, I was contacted by them. Are you interviewing Chloe?
I'm not interviewing Chloe. I'm going to be introducing Philippe Huguilar. So Chloe is the head judge.
Right.
Right. And Philippe is a member of the actual organization.
Right.
Right.
I have to make a point about this competition.
Sure.
Maybe their costs are very high, but the price to enter is extremely high. So I think a lot of people are hesitating to participate because the entry cost is very, very high.
Right. And it is a business decision that they have made. Yes. So, and I sort of, wonder how that skews participation. But what I will say is that one of the reasons why the entry costs are high is that you need to be a member of the AVPA in order to enter. And most of the entrance costs are, matter of fact, associated with a membership, not actually
costs. Yes.
I'm sorry?
Are the affiliation costs? Yes, that's correct.
The affiliation costs, so it would be, there was an International Chocolate Awards Association, and you needed to pay a membership fee, or you needed to pay a membership fee to become a member of the Academy of Chocolate before you could submit an award. So that's the relationship right now. Yeah. And with that, I want to say thank you very much to everybody who's been here with us today. I especially want to thank you, Carlos, for being here today, for sharing your enthusiasm and your history and background and everything like that. And I want to sign off as I always do and just remind everybody, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Cheers, everybody.